it's always fun to talk about brands, and there's a sense in which business is all about brands. And for the first time in the history of Interbrand's Best Global Brands report, there's a new number one, and that's Apple, pushing the leading number one brand for the past 13 years. That's Coke to number 3. Now, Doug de Villiers, who's CEO of Interbrand in South Africa, joins us. Interbrand Samson de Villiers, I think, is the full title. He joins us now for more. Morning, Doug. I suppose it's a case of a great old brand that has always been a strong brand being knocked off by a new, relatively new brand. All these tech brands are relatively new, and I suppose it reflects how these gadgets and the electronic space that we operate in is now dominating our mindsets.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think we can say that Coke has been knocked off. I mean, it grew again by 2%, but it has dominated the table since 2000, since they started, and has proven year and year again to be a really, really powerful brand. But yes, technology, all the tech brands have grown very, very well. One or two that have fallen out. Apple, no real surprise. This is an organization that has grown by 28% of brand value. It's right the way through to number one. And very simply because the brand is good. You know, even after the passing of Steve Jobs, the organization, its connection to the market, its ability to leverage that brand at every touch point has been superb.
And people also use the brand when they talk about the technology. So
Absolutely.
It's one of those things where they are in the same breath. You say the Apple iPad or the Apple this or the Samsung and so on. A lot of those other companies are up there, and the social media are up there as brands.
Absolutely, and to be expected. Facebook, one of the biggest risers again, and again reflecting what the environment and what the new economies are about. We use all these social platforms for pretty much everything that we do, and this value is being translated into those organizations, be it Facebook or be it any of the other high-tech companies.
What's the summary of what it takes to be that top brand? There've got to be criteria that you measure them by.
Yeah, look, the actual methodology is the one side. Of course, we look at the financial performance of these organizations. We look at their spread. To be a global brand, you need to be global. You need to be on more than 3 continents. You need to have a meaningful presence, over 30% outside of your, if you like, natural or home market. You have to be an economically viable entity, and you have to be well recognized around the world. But the actual calculation, looking at the role that brand plays in the purchase decision, looking at how strong these brands are versus their competitors in each market, and then of course the financial valuation comes out of that, which is an ISO valuation, 10668 put together by Interbrand as well.
Now, what about some of the other sectors? We've talked tech and we've talked Coke, which is a classic consumer brand. What about cars, for example? That is something also that, like the technology, the small technology, cars are the big technology that everyone is involved in.
Yeah, and cars are doing remarkably well. So, I mean, like 14 of the top 100 brands sit in the automotive space. 11 of those actually went up in this last year. Toyota, again, leads the charge. A lot of it has to do with the technology, the ability of Toyota to link with its market. They're very, very good at understanding and predicting what the market wants, and then investing heavily in the technology to make it happen in the form of very good fuel economy in the Toyota vehicles, and just remaining relevant and top of mind in all the markets that it operates. Truly a great example.
What about financial services? That's a sector that's gone through some tough times, and bankers make a lot of money, but there's no downside when they don't do well. There's perhaps some trust issues that weren't there before with the big banks and financial institutions. So what does your survey tell us about them?
Yeah, banking brands, financial brands over the last couple of years from 2008 through absolutely took a bit of a hammering. The reputation of banks at large have been dented a little bit. What a lot of brands have been concentrating on is rebuilding that trust in many areas. And again, for the first time this year, it has translated into significant growth amongst the 11 brands, financial brands that feature in the top 100. So very clearly there is a return to trust in financial organizations, and perhaps it also reflects a little bit of increased confidence in economies as a whole.
South African brands, any of them pushing to be in this kind of company?
There's a bunch that should be, they're right up there. If you look at just the value calculations we do on the likes of MTN or Standard Bank and a whole host of them, they would qualify by their value straight away. But the rules to be a global brand, again, these organizations need to have a meaningful presence on 3 major continents.
Well, a company that comes to mind is SAB Miller, which is all over. On the other hand, it's an interesting one because SAB Miller is the corporate brand, but then it's got very powerful, for example, in South Africa. And in fact, its philosophy in all the countries it goes to, it drives the individual brands, Castle, Black Label, Snow, whatever.
Exactly right.
So they kind of, do they fall between stools because they've got powerful individual brands, and despite their reach, their corporate brand doesn't have that power.
That's exactly the issue. You don't buy SAB, you buy Castle, or you buy one of the brands related to it. In those individual brands sits the bucket of real value. At a corporate brand level, no, there's not as much that would put it into the top 100. And the Castle, unfortunately, is not a multi-continental brand at this stage.
So it'd be interesting to look through, and maybe you can say this, is of those top ones where the product is synonymous with the company's name, and that's where the power comes.
Oh, the easiest one is Apple. Just go in there. I mean, there may be different naming criteria into iPod, iPad, Apple Mac and what have you, but the Apple core part of the brand is the primary thing that is purchased. So it's the anchor to the brand itself.
Are there any sort of high risers, fresh newcomers that have come into this list? Because the established names, the Fords and the Toyotas and the Cokes, we know that they've been there. What's sort of burst through the surface here?
Well, the interesting one is Discovery. So just from in your field, if you like, this is a brand that has been well known for a long period of time. But over the last couple of years, since sort of 2012, where they really shot through the roof from a financial performance point of view, Discovery has taken themselves into something like over 24 different languages, over 270 different countries. But they've also brought within that Discovery platform some interesting brands that support the whole Discovery brand, along the lines of Mythbusters and these kind of programs. Deadliest
Now, Discovery,
Catch,
you're not talking about Adrian Gore's Discovery here.
No, I'm talking about the TV.
No, but I think people might have said, well,
yes.
You can believe the way Adrian Gore's Discovery has been growing. Maybe it did.
It's a great brand, but it's not quite at this level yet.
What are you talking? So which Discovery are you talking?
Discovery Channel. We're talking the media channels, obviously, for Discovery. So that's one of the really surprising entrants that has torn in there quite well. And then, of course, there's been a couple that have fallen directly out, and partly no surprise. We've seen big declines in the likes of Nokia, organizations that seem to have lost a huge amount of their relevance in the various markets. We've seen some issues obviously going into, let me get the one that's actually the biggest move. Nintendo, MTV. So in even those categories, there's been some brands that have just lost their connectivity, lost their relevance, and have slipped out of the top 100, unfortunately.
It's very crowded when it comes to the media and the gadgets and the tablets and so on. Can they all keep going at this rate and with this brand strength? I suppose if the market keeps growing, they can.
Well, it's the way the market is going. And we'll see one of the big brands to watch is going to be something like Samsung. So if you're looking at Apple, a key competitor that they're going to have coming through, absolutely. The ability of organizations like that to innovate, to be relevant to their market, to be very agile, to move and connect with their markets quickly, is very quickly driving these brands right to the top of the pile. Samsung's for sure one to watch quite closely.
What effect do surveys like this have? Because in a sense it can reinforce what it's discovered.
Yes, absolutely. Well, there's two sides to it. Of course, anything that looks at brands as an asset of value is important in the world. The moment organizations realize that they have a tremendous asset in their brand and they can leverage it for economic benefit, and they can do good with those brands as well. This is important. It's a new conversation. It's creating new partnerships. It's driving a lot of economies. So the awareness and the understanding of the brand asset is absolutely critical. Now, the best global brands from Interbrand is one of the top 3 read publications by the sort of S&P 500 leadership, because more and more the CEOs and the CMOs, the chief marketing officers, work very, very closely together to leverage this brand asset. And that's a step in the right direction.
What will the guys at Coke be doing after 13 years at the top? I mean, yes, you said they grew, but it will be important to them that they're not number one anymore.
Yes, I think Coke will understand that the world is changing. Coke will always be there. It's a highly relevant brand in its own right. It's omnipresent. It's got a great product offering. I think they would be mature enough to understand that the technology brands are galloping ahead simply because they're so easily accessible. Not that Coke isn't, but you're on your phone. You're using technology.
A lot of it's new, isn't it?
Absolutely.
In fact, the strength of Coke is that it's not new. I mean, they made that big mistake by saying, what was it, new Coke, old Coke, change the formula. Boy, did they go back to the classic formula again.
Well, the strength of Coke has just been relevance. They've remained authentic and relevant over a 126-year period, and I don't think they're going to lose that. Every single year they go about relooking at their brand, their offering, their portfolio, and how they present it to market. And it remains authentic, whether it's you, me, or our children. The guys get CocaCola. Tech brands are just galloping a little bit quicker, but that's the way of the world.
If you were one of these guys who were sort of in the mid-table, I mean, are you going to take a lot of trouble now to try and get higher in the table, or is it enough to be in the top 100?
Well, remember that the table, the ranking there is not just a ranking number. the value to each of those brands is related to that brand's ability to create revenue in the organization. So it's about enterprise value. So absolutely, I mean, most organizations are out there to create enterprise value. If you can understand looking at your brand strength and the competitive environment and those items that are driving the top brands, and you can have a look at your own brands through that same lens, you'll get some pretty good ideas as to where you need to start innovating to grow your brand, to bring in greater revenue and be a more efficient and more professional brand.